now. Firstly, you can resize the webinar windows to cater to your viewing preferences. You can maximize, minimize, and drag the windows to your preferred viewing size. If you look at the bottom middle of your screen, you can click on the widgets that you'll need to get the most out of this virtual experience. Secondly, Microsoft specialists are on hand to answer your questions in real time. So feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A window and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Lastly, we've provided some additional resources for you to supplement your learning. You can access them by clicking on the links in this section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Welcome to this Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day, Secure and Protect Your Organization. In Part 1, we'll cover the first 3 modules of the course. We begin by discussing user and group management. Then we'll move on to talking about how to synchronize and protect your identities within the cloud. Finally, we'll look at identity and access management, where we discuss seamless single sign-on and conditional access, among other things. So, let's get started with our first module. We build in experiences, intelligence, and integration into the security technology we offer at Microsoft. This shows up in 4 broad areas. First of all, with identity and access management, we look at how the vast majority of breaches begin with compromised passwords. This is the single weakest link in most security strategies. Our customers also consistently tell us about their concerns for the high volume of data and alerts and the increasing sophistication and impact of attacks. So we prioritize integrated and automated threat protection to help meet the demand for advanced security that works in the real world. Thirdly, our customers tell us about difficulties they have with protection and governance of their information. We actually see that around 64% of organizations report that employees externally share PII and other sensitive business data without encryption. So we've made information protection a priority to protect customer sensitive data wherever it lives or travels, so you can work with confidence. And as enterprises move more of their workloads to the cloud, it has never been more important to protect cross-cloud resources. From Azure to AWS, from Slack to Salesforce, we've built comprehensive cloud security to protect every layer of your resources, regardless of which cloud or cloud apps you use. We see a lot of challenges around identity from the fact that 73% of passwords are duplicates. We also see that around 80% of employees use non-approved apps for work, which causes more challenges around managing identities. And around 81% of breaches are caused by credential theft. So it's very important to consider identity and access management. Identity is actually the control plane for digital transformation. In this world, your identity system in the cloud is your control plane that can connect everything, give you visibility to your entire digital estate, ensure that only the right people have the right access to the right resources, and keep the bad players out. Microsoft's Azure Active Directory is a universal identity platform. It can help you manage and secure all of your users and access to all of your applications. Now, it's important to have a comprehensive identity governance solution to ensure that the right users have the right access at the right time. We have built-in capabilities in Azure Active Directory that help you protect, monitor, and audit access throughout the user lifecycle. When you have a new user join your organization, you can automate how you grant access rights to resources. If you connect it via the HR system, a user can receive a set of access rights for their role with entitlement management access packages. Then, as users need additional access rights, we provide them with the ability to do self-service access requests. Even guest users, such as vendors and partners, can be monitored and reviewed for greater security. When it comes to administrative rights and admins, you can use privileged identity management for just-in-time access, alerts, and approval workflows to protect access to critical resources. Something that we encourage you to ask yourself is, how many global admins do you have? This is the highest level of administrative access in Azure AD. So you want to make sure that you don't have more than you need, since excessive access could be a risk to your environment. At the end of the life cycle, you can use your HR app to make sure access rights are removed. Now, this is an entire map of all the capabilities that are needed for an effective identity and access management in the cloud era. We've actually been working on this map with analyst firms and customers to ensure that we don't miss anything important. Microsoft's commitment is to deliver one simple, integrated, and complete identity solution for all your needs. This includes application access, event logging and reporting, service resilience, performance, scalability, and ease of use. So, how does Zero Trust employ these principles? Well, every access request is strongly authenticated, authorized within policy constraints, and inspected for anomalies before granting access. Everything from the user's identity to the application's hosting environment is used to verify the request and prevent breach. And to limit the impact of potential breaches, we apply segmentation policies, employing the principle of least privileged access, and then use analytics to help detect and respond quickly. But the essence of Zero Trust remains simple. Security models which assume safety based on network location are inadequate. We're really living in a new reality. The old assumptions will not keep us secure in the new world. We find that it's no longer acceptable to just assume that everything behind the corporate firewall is safe. For new principles, we want to verify explicitly, always authenticating and authorizing based on available data points. This includes user identity, location, device health, data classification, and anomalies. The second concept within Microsoft Zero Trust principles is using least privilege access. We want to limit user access to protect both data and productivity. We can use things like just-in-time and just-enough access. And finally, we want to always assume breach. This lets us minimize the blast radius for breaches and employ security strategy to prevent lateral movement across our environments. When we approach Zero Trust and think about it holistically, we want it to extend throughout the entire digital estate. This allows it to serve as an integrated security philosophy and end-to-end strategy. There are 6 foundational elements across Zero Trust controls and technologies. These include identities, devices, data, applications, infrastructure, and network. So it's important to verify identity. We want to know who is requesting access, validate that identity explicitly, and ensure that we're using strong authorization and threat intelligence to validate that authentication. When we verify devices, we want all data access requests resulting in the transfer of the data to a browser or app on a device that is not lost, stolen, or infected. Third, we want to protect our data. Wherever possible, data should be protected by auto classification and encryption to protect against intentional or accidental misrouting and download of data. Since applications and configuration to those applications must be secure in order to mitigate intrinsic application risks, we want to ensure that we govern access through policy. We can look at application behavior, including shadow IT, to look for and protect from anomalies. Where we're using cloud workloads such as IaaS or PaaS, it's important to ensure that you're utilizing the cloud fabric according to the best security principles, utilizing intelligence and protection provided. And finally, we want to govern our networks by mitigating lateral movement using intelligent adaptive segmentation strategies for workloads and monitoring those and protecting from anomalous traffic patterns. When we look at Microsoft 365 identity models, it's important to first understand that there are two identity models that you need to account for when planning for user accounts. We have both the cloud identity and the hybrid identity. A cloud-only identity uses user accounts that exist only in Azure AD. With cloud-only identity, all your users, groups, and contacts are stored in Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, and both on-premises and remote users use their Azure AD user accounts and passwords to access Microsoft 365 cloud services. Now, depending on your business needs and technical requirements, the hybrid identity model may be your best choice. Hybrid identity uses accounts that originate in an on-prem Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS, and have a copy in the Azure AD tenant of a Microsoft 365 subscription. This means that changes you make to ADDS user accounts are synchronized to a copy in Azure AD. But changes made to cloud-based accounts in Azure AD, such as a new user account, are not synchronized back to ADDS. When you implement hybrid identity, your on-prem ADDS is the authoritative source for account information. When using the hybrid identity model, there are two types of authentication. There's managed authentication, where Azure AD is handling the authentication process by using a locally stored hashed version of the password. And then we have federated authentication, where Azure AD is redirecting the client computer requesting authentication to another identity provider. Within managed authentication, we have two types of managed authentications. We have password hash synchronization, PHS, where Azure AD performs the authentication itself. And we also have pass-through authentication, PTA, which is where Azure AD has ADDS perform the authentication. With PHS, you synchronize your ADDS user accounts with Microsoft 365 and then manage your users on-prem. Hashes of user passwords are synchronized from your ADDS to Azure AD so that the users have the same password on premises and in the cloud. This is the simplest way to enable authentication for ADDS identities in Azure AD. When passwords are changed or reset on premises, the new password hashes are synchronized to Azure AD, and this means your users can always use the same password for both cloud resources and on-premises resources. Pass-through authentication provides a simple password validation for Azure AD authentication services by using a software agent running on one or more of your on-prem servers. It then validates the users directly with your ADDS. Pass-through authentication synchronizes user accounts from ADDS to Microsoft 365, and you manage your users on premises. PTA also allows your users to sign in to both on-premises and Microsoft 365 resources and applications using their on-prem account and password. This configuration validates user passwords directly against your on-prem ADDS without storing password hashes in Azure AD. Directory synchronization allows you to manage your identity in Active Directory Domain Services, and then all updates to your user accounts, groups, and contacts are synchronized into the Azure Active Directory tenant of your Microsoft 365 subscription. The Azure AD Connect tool is what's used to synchronize your user accounts from ADDS to Azure AD. It's made up of three parts. We have the synchronization services, the optional Active Directory Federation services piece, and the monitoring piece. Azure AD Connect comes with several features which you can turn on, and some are enabled by default. It's important to note that it requires a single source of authority for every object, and the source of authority in this case is the on-premises Active Directory. When you use Azure AD Connect for cloud provisioning from Active Directory to Azure AD is orchestrated in Microsoft Online Services. So an organization only needs to deploy in their on-premises and IaaS hosted environments a single lightweight agent to act as a bridge between Azure AD and Active Directory domain services. The provisioning configuration is then stored in Azure AD and managed as part of the service. Tying it all together, let's take a quick review of the different identity models and considerations. When you choose the cloud authentication method, Azure AD handles the user sign-in process. Coupled with seamless single sign-on, users can sign in to cloud apps without having to re-enter their credentials. With cloud authentication, you get to choose from two options: Azure AD password hash synchronization, which is the simplest way to enable authentication for on-premises directory objects in Azure AD, and then Azure AD pass-through authentication. You also have the option of federated authentication. When you choose this authentication method, Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system, such as an on-premises Active Directory federation services, to then validate the user's password. When it comes to creating user accounts, you can use different methods to provision them depending on your needs. This includes directory synchronization, Windows PowerShell, the ability to import multiple users, and also doing so within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. When you need to manage user accounts and licenses, you can use the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to do so. It allows you to edit single or multiple users and to change settings such as location settings, administrator roles, sign-in status. It also allows you to assign licenses here. When it comes to administrator roles such as global admin and service admin, it's important to note that Microsoft 365 licenses can be assigned within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Keep in mind that when users leave your organization, they usually no longer require a user account in Microsoft 365. So when you delete a user account, the assigned Microsoft 365 license for that user becomes available, which you can then assign to another user. Microsoft 365 retains the account as a soft deleted inactive account for 30 days after deletion. This enables you to restore the account should you need to do so. Again, you can use the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to perform these functions or Windows PowerShell. Within Microsoft 365, you can use groups to manage sets of users. You can manage groups such as dynamic distribution groups in Exchange, mail-enabled security groups, Office 365 groups, and distribution lists. The Microsoft 365 Admin Center also allows you to change password settings for your users. By default, users' passwords expire after 90 days, and then users receive a notification of a password expiration of 14 days. So this is an example of a setting that you can change within the Admin Center. If necessary, you can also go here to reset a password for one or multiple users. And then if you forget your own administrator password, you can actually reset the password yourself here or have another administrator reset it for you. Microsoft 365 has an option for multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. This increases security by having users provide a second authentication method when they sign in. This might be something like acknowledging a text message or a phone call or having some other notification on their phones. If you want to enable MFA in Microsoft 365 Admin, then a tenant administrator can do so by enabling it here. We also have the option of self-service password reset. This allows users to reset their own passwords without requiring intervention by the administrator. Keep in mind, self-service password reset is not enabled by default. In order to reset a password, users have to authenticate their identity first. There are two verification methods that administrators must use when using self-service password reset. And one of these cannot include security questions for administrators. All right, now we're going to take a look at a guided demonstration for self-service password. In this case, we'll take a look at Isaiah, who would like to reset his password without calling the IT help desk. So first, we're going to reset his password and then validate authentication. So we're going to reset Isaiah's password as Isaiah to demonstrate the self-service password reset. Here we go to sign in as Isaiah with his user ID. We're going to click Next after entering his full username and email address. Since he's actually forgotten his password and wants to reset it without having to call in the help desk, we'll click on the Forgot My Password link. Now, to recover the account, we need to first enter Isaiah's user ID, and then we're going to enter the characters in the picture below. Click Next. In this case, to verify, we can either choose to receive an email or a text to our mobile phone. For this example, we'll receive a text to Isaiah's mobile phone. Here we enter the phone number that's on record to ensure that it matches, and then click Text. Once Isaiah has received that text message with the verification code, it can be entered here. And then we'll click Next. And it's time to create a new password. We'll confirm it, typing it in twice, and click Finish. So as you can see, that was really easy for Isaiah to perform a self-service password reset that let him do so without calling the help desk. Sometimes it's hard to remember strong passwords, and we find that users often reuse passwords on multiple sites because of this. Server breaches can expose symmetric network credentials, and passwords are subject to replay attacks. We find that users also inadvertently expose their passwords due to phishing attacks. So instead of always having users try to remember passwords, we can use password alternatives such as Windows Hello, Microsoft Authenticator, and FIDO2 security keys. So let's take a look at each of these password alternatives a little more closely. In Windows 10, Windows Hello for Business replaces passwords with strong two-factor authentication on PCs and mobile devices. This authentication consists of a new type of user credential that's tied to a device and uses a biometric or a PIN. You can authenticate to Active Directory or Azure Active Directory with Windows Hello for Business. The Microsoft Authenticator app helps you sign into your accounts using two-factor verification. You can use it in multiple ways, including responding to a prompt for authentication after you sign in with your username and password, or to sign in without entering a password, and as a code generator for any other accounts that support Authenticator apps. You can use a fingerprint, face recognition, or a PIN in conjunction with the Authenticator app. And if anything happens to your mobile device, or if you forget your PIN, your password will still get you into your account. Microsoft also supports FIDO2 security keys. The FIDO Alliance, or Fast Identity Online, is one of our most important partnerships today. The organizations that you see here are the FIDO's board members, but more than 250 organizations are members of the Alliance. The members work together to improve authentication standards and help reduce the world's over-reliance on passwords. Our goal is to make sure that everybody who uses services on the web or on premises has a secure and convenient sign-in experience with credentials that eliminate phishing. For example, say I sign into my Microsoft Surface. I then have secure authentication to my device and every service and application I use with facial recognition or other biometrics enabled. I can use this throughout the day with one secure sign-in. The operating system, browser, applications, and credentials that I'm using here support the FIDO standards to make this all happen. The number of FIDO compliant devices and services continues to grow. All of the common browsers, Edge, Firefox, and Chrome support FIDO, and there are multiple security key options that use USB, Bluetooth, or NFC to connect to meet different business needs. Another way of protecting your identities is through using Azure AD Smart Lockout. This helps lock out bad actors that try to guess your users' passwords or brute force methods to get in. Attackers will get locked out, but we recognize sign-ins from valid users and treat them differently so that users can continue to access their accounts and be productive. Azure AD Smart Lockout can be integrated with hybrid deployments that use password hash sync or pass-through authentication. Smart Lockout is always on for all Azure AD customers to offer you the right mix of security and usability. In Module 1, we learned about identity and access management concepts such as the Zero Trust model and user accounts and roles. We'll now take a 10-minute break. We'll see everyone back here when we start Module 2, Synchronizing and Protecting Identities in the Cloud.